Hello, everybody. This is Erica Frenay from the Cornell Small Farms. Hopefully all of you can hear me okay. I'm just going to do a brief introduction here, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to Anu Rangarajan, the director of the Small Farms program. We're really glad that you've all joined us today for this very important conversation on cultural competency for serving diverse beginning farmer audiences. Although I believe there are a lot of you out there who are joining us who don't necessarily work with beginning farmers, so I think our conversation is going to be expanded beyond that particular audience. This is the fourth and final webinar in our summer lunchtime learning series, originated as part of the Northeast Beginning Farmer Project, and our intent to keep the organizations in the Northeast that serve beginning farmers connected over the summer and learning from each other. But it seemed that there was interest across the country in some of the topics that we've covered, things like land access and alternative financing for beginning farmers. And now this topic in particular seems to have inspired a lot of interest from folks across the country. So we're glad that we've expanded it, and we welcome those of you who are joining us outside of the Northeast. So I'm going to move us now into, we're still in the waiting room here, I'm going to move us into our presentation area. And so you'll hear from Anu and then from the speakers, Gail Myers from Farms to Grow, Joanna Green, and Millie Gustafson from Groundswell Center for Local Food and Farming. And then we'll move into a discussion section. And in that section, you'll be able to download some documents that all of the presenters will be discussing in their presentations. And we'll have plenty of opportunity, we hope. We're going to try to move this along really quickly so we have lots of opportunity for discussion. And this webinar is being recorded, and I will post it afterwards. I will send you all an email of where to find the link to the recording of this webinar. And to participate, you can do a number of things. Mostly we use this chat box, which a few of you have already started using. There's a little, in the bottom left of your screen, there's a little area where you can type into, and when you hit enter, your comments will show up in the chat pod, and we will try to manage your comments and questions throughout the presentation. You also should have a little icon at the top of your screen of a person raising their hand. And you can raise your hand if you need to get our attention for any reason. You'll see a number of other options here. You can ask us, you can indicate that you'd like us to speak louder or more softly. You can agree or disagree with something that's said, and you can also applaud or laugh. There's lots of cute little icons there. So that's how to interact with us during the webinar, since we won't actually be able to hear you. And then before I hand it over to Anu, just one more thing I wanted to do. Our presenters today would love to know a little bit more about those of you who have joined us. So if you could take just a moment and let us know what organization or who you're affiliated with, that would be helpful for them to know who the audience is today. Okay. Looks like we have nearly half of our audience, university staff and faculty, a lot of community organization staff, and then smaller representation from ag service providers. We have a few students or interns and a few farmers with us today, and some aspiring farmers too. Great. Thank you for that. And one more poll for you. Oops. We would like to know also, because this is meant to be a very frank discussion about race and that particular aspect of diversity, it would help if you could let us know how you identify. Okay. So we have about 82% of us are white, but we do have some diversity here. Looks like we have 4 Black or African American folks and a few folks who identify as Latino. Just 1 Asian and 2 immigrant or first generation American, and 1 One person who didn't want to provide information at this time. Okay. With that, I'm going to close these polls and hand the mic over to Anu Rangarajan.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad that you're able to join us for this very important conversation starter. I would emphasize starter because I think that this topic of cultural competency is one in which once you start, it ends up being something that you focus on in a lot of your work for a long time, because we can always improve the way in which we are able to extend ourselves and include others in the work that we do. So I am the director of the Cornell Small Farm Program, and our program's mission is to enhance the viability of small farms in New York and the region and the nation through doing extension, research, and building collaborative networks. And it's in our work that with beginning farmers, that we actually first started to think much more carefully about how we create programs that are inclusive and in fact do reach and provide supportive services to those that have been non-traditional audiences. I hope that everyone can hear me okay.
And we have one person who's raised their hand. Mary, ask Mary if she wants to type something.
Mary, if you would like to type something, please go ahead and put it in the chat box. Okay. So I'm hoping that you can all hear me. If not, let us know in the chat box. I'm not very well. Okay, I'm hoping that's better. And so, as I was saying, we in the program started to think very carefully about these issues of reaching diverse audiences. And in particular, when we look at the agricultural census, we know that we're seeing increases in the number of Latino, African American, as well as women farmers that are actually accessing our services. But how do we know, and how can we make sure that we indeed are being as inclusive as we can, not only in the way that we present ourselves, but the way that we reach out and engage and talk with and learn and understand people's experiences. And so we're hoping that today's conversation will help you think about this and to recognize that you're not alone in thinking about this. It can be kind of a difficult topic at times because it requires us to look at ourselves first. And so just the nature of the topic does require personal commitment. It is transformative, and it does affect the way that you see all of your own interactions with others. And so with that, what we're hoping to do is we have several goals for today, and those include to increase our own personal sensitivity and cultural competency related to working across differences. And while we're focusing on race today, we recognize that these efforts and this sensitivity goes across all sorts of inequity, including class, gender, socioeconomic background, any of the various areas in which we may be working with underserved audiences. The second goal for us is to have a greater awareness of materials and resources that might be able to guide you and your organization towards reaching and engaging diverse audiences. And we are going to provide some information to you towards the end of this webinar, and would welcome any additions or any other materials you think have been really useful to you. If you would share them, we will also post those and make them available for everyone who's participated today. And as I said, this is the beginning of a conversation that we hope to continue to cultivate with all of you. And our final goal is that you walk away with some concrete steps towards building greater inclusiveness and cultural sensitivity in your own. And so I'm getting the sound. I'm usually not very quiet, so it's quite surprising that I'm hearing that I should be speaking louder, and part of it is trying to speak into this. But with that, I just hope that sets the stage for what we're trying to do. What we acknowledge, and I think all of our presenters will also share with you, is that all of us are challenged in looking and thinking about inequities that exist, both in our work, in the food system, and in all parts of our society. And that no matter who we think we are, or how we think we've been in the past, we are still part of that system, and it's our responsibility to be sensitive and to think about this carefully. And that change in all of this starts from within. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over and let our speakers give you a short introduction of themselves. We will start with Gail Myers, and then we'll move to Joanna Green and Millie Gustafson here. So with that, Gail.
Good morning. Does everyone hear me okay? Does it sound, I don't want to talk too close, but I think that great. Well, I'm in Oakland, California, so it's not too early for me. It's a little after 9. And so I want to send you greetings from the West Coast, the Bay Area in particular. Before 1997, I was an academic, someone doing research, going about my business. And I entered into a PhD program at Ohio State in cultural anthropology. The first week I was there with my advisor who worked with Amish farmers, we were talking about black farmers. At that time, I have to say I didn't know much about black farmers. I left his office, went straight to the library, and started doing a lit search on African American farmers. At that time, it was the beginning of the Pickford versus USDA litigation. So I was intrigued by what that was all about. Needless to say, about 5 years later, I ended up doing a dissertation on black farmers in Ohio. Upon graduation, I thought that I wanted to really advocate and pursue some of what I heard in the stories from the interviews that black farmers were telling me. They needed these resources. They were up against this challenge. They were doing that. And I said, wow, perhaps I could do something. So in 2004, I started Farms to Grow. I went to Atlanta, which is where I got my master's at Georgia State. I was talking to folks about sustainable agriculture. Nobody knew anything about that. Eventually moved to the Bay Area, and everybody was really on board with sustainable agriculture. And that's because that's what I found the practice that African American farmers were pursuing. They were basically agroecologists. They were farming with the ecosystem in mind. And they were, very early sustainable farmers. So the work in 2004 basically started with a focus on African American farmers. In working in communities here in California, I began to talk to Latino farmers and Vietnamese farmers that were dealing with some similar challenges. So we partner and ally and advocate also for other farmers as well. The slides, basically Farms to Grow. What we are encouraged to do is grow the next generation of farmers and gardeners and small farmers. So what we do here in San Francisco in the Bay Area is that we have several nutrition and school garden programs. You'll see some photos from the top. This is a garden that we embraced and engaged the students, and there are some after pictures, but they're not here. But yeah, there's one right below where the little girl is watering some tomatoes. So we did that with the students. We can say now that there are a core of about 30 students that are a part of this after school program that know how to clear land, plant seeds, and harvest produce. We have a farmer to school program. That's me in the middle there with one of our farmers, Kurt Lucero. And he comes to the school, talk to our students, brings strawberries, and there's a demonstration on the far right with him at one of our other gardens we have at an elementary school that we've had for about 5 years. So we're trying to get the next generation of small farmers from urban schools, and we also engage farmers to come to our schools. And so for me, though, what I've done is I've interviewed African American farmers, I've researched, I've taught a course, I've written, I've presented, and most recently I've just finished filming a documentary where I was in 8 states in the South: Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. I think I'm leaving one out. But capturing stories from sharecroppers and farmers and listening to a lot more of still some of the same things I heard in my interviews 10 years ago and 15 years ago, farmers are continued to be challenged by. But, I'd love to share a lot more about, from my experience in dealing with cultural competency. As I said, I am a cultural anthropologist, so I have some of that background in my repertoire as well. So I'm looking forward to sharing more with you. Thank you.
Great. Let's hear then from Joanna and Millie, please.
Hi, everybody. First, this is Joanna Green. I have been working in the field of sustainable ag, local food systems, et cetera, for about 31 years. I just counted it up. So it's been a wonderful, rich experience. And I'm now 58 years old. I'm a white woman. My background in this field in the last 30 years has been almost all of it as an affiliate of Cornell University. And can everybody hear me okay? Um, so back in, actually before 1981, I started off as a dropout from a graduate program in neurobiology and behavior. I dropped out of academics to volunteer, and then I became a staff person at a very small kind of fly-by-night nonprofit called the Center for Local Food and Agriculture, which was affiliated with Cornell University, but it was definitely not part of the ag school. So I spent about 5 years working with that organization, looking at local food systems here in the Ithaca area. I was very early on. Our farmers market was just very young. We had a very young food co-op and that sort of thing. But after a few years, I did end up in the ag school in a series of programs over the next 25 years or so that developed since 1986. And so I started off in a program called the Farming Alternatives Program, where we looked primarily at alternative enterprises for farmers. And then we began to look at community issues that impact farmers' options. And we morphed that program into the Center for the Cornell Community Food and Agriculture Program. And then I had a mid-career crisis, moved to Hawaii for a year, and when I came back, I joined the Small Farms Program. And after a couple of years under Dave Smith there, Anu Rangarajan became the director of that program, and so I worked with Anu happily for 8 years in the Small Farms Program. So I feel very close to that program, and the whole crew up there are doing a great job. In 2009, I did retire from Cornell, took early retirement, and started working full-time on a project that I had been starting on the sidelines called the Groundswell Center for Local Food and Farming. And that, again, is kind of coming full circle to the nonprofit sector, and it's more of a community-based local regional organization here in the Ithaca, New York, Tompkins County area. And our main focus, I would say, is on beginning farmer training, although we do some other programming as well. In terms of our topic today, up until about 2009, when I started working with Groundswell, my entire work world and community really was almost entirely white. So the farmers that I worked with, my colleagues, the students that I worked with, really it was a very, very white, very monocultural environment. I also grew up in the suburbs in a predominantly white neighborhood. Our family was very politically liberal, but still an all-white context. So although I was very aware of issues of discrimination and race and racism, it was kind of like, well, I'm very, very busy with my work. I'm going to let other people deal with that. I really don't have time for that. The people that I work with, it's not an issue for them because we are all white after all. So that's sort of where I was coming from a few years ago, and I guess I'll leave it at that for now, and the rest of the story comes later. So, Millie.
Hi, this is Millie Gustafson. I was born and raised in the Bronx. My parents are Puerto Rican. I got involved with Groundswell after having been unemployed for about a year, and was going to the Labor Department, and where I heard about the green workshops. And actually what's triggered my interest in the environment, really it was the interest of being involved in protecting the environment. After the disaster in Japan and the Gulf oil spill, I just thought it was really crazy that, we were letting this kind of stuff happen. And it has to do with our consumption. And I felt that I needed to get involved some way in the environment and protecting the environment. And so I was going to the Labor Department, filling applications, and I found out about workshops in the green industry. So I went to a few of the workshops where they had panelists from local companies involved with energy and the environment, and I heard about Groundswell. And well, first I took a solar energy classes, and I really wanted to know where I could fit in protecting the environment. So I took solar energy classes, and then I felt, well, I don't know if that's for me. And then I heard about the agricultural classes, and I said, wow, that sounds really interesting. And Groundswell is involved in sustainable farming, which is pretty much protecting the environment in their farming practices. So I decided to take the summer practicum, which was a 6 to 8 week classes in local food systems and agriculture. And I consider myself a really I've always been involved in outdoor activities, so I'm really close to the environment. So I thought, this really piqued my curiosity, and it made me, so I'm kind of leaning towards agriculture. Where I fit in, I'm not sure yet, since I have learned a lot, about agriculture, and that it's really difficult to get involved in it, financially and as well as physically. Physically, I think I can handle it, but and I know you don't go in it for the money, so it's something that you really want to do on a personal level. So, my background has always been working in an office environment. I've been a secretary or admin assistant for 30 years. I'm 51. So my body and my mind is craving outdoors. And that was another reason, that I'm kind of really interested in this. So I'm just kind of poking around, trying to find where I fit in. And basically that's it. And I guess later on I'll talk about how I feel we could reach out to minorities.
Can I just add one thing, Millie?
Yeah.
That Millie was a student of ours, so last year, I believe, and then as of a few months ago, she's been our administrative manager. So we're really happy to have her doing office work here with us.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you, Gail, Joanna, and Millie. And so now we're going to launch into some more detail and the presentations by each of our folks. And what I would like to do is to encourage you again to be entering questions into the chat box, because we'll have basically presentations till about 1 o'clock, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. We'll probably go to about 1:05 actually, and then we'll have a general discussion, and we will be keeping track of your questions in the chat box, and then be able to discuss things then together. And so why don't we go ahead and start with Gail?
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is, I want to focus on the cultural competency of those that are serving or wanting to serve African American farmers, beginning, existing, experienced, in the future. And for about the next 15 minutes, I want to just talk to us about knowing thyself, which in personal and organizational, familiarizing oneself with the history of African American farmers, and organizing toward real anti-racist work. And I'm using, for example, a couple of articles, one from Rachel Slocum and Julie Guthman, both here in California. Let me just start out by saying, too, that I'm really encouraged by the interest in this topic and the growing trend. I don't know if I should use that word, trending for real inclusion. I mean, it feels like a real social transformation. The world is changing and transforming, And we're feeling the changes that are taking place within the world, taking place in our community. And in this, the inclusion desire to understand and pursue even anti-racist work is the next turn, I think, in our social evolution. And I see this evolution in social thought and these processes that are examining our own beliefs. They're being born out of more and more people wanting a greater understanding of how to bridge the gaps in difference. And like this workshop, for example, you all are joining it because you want to increase your sensitivity to other people's stories and begin to do anti-racist work. And I referred to Slocum and Gutman because I actually like Slocum's framework. Slocum sees the anti-racist practice as a framework for building alliances across difference. Her article really gets at the core of this power dynamic with race, class, and gender. She looks at white privilege and how these form the discourse that excludes some people from being at the table. And I know, judging from your questions, you all want people at the table. So we're looking at shifting the power dynamics, but it's over a long-term process. And it's incorporating more leadership and building leadership within the ranks of those less powerful groups, so that may be a solution-based framework. But I don't want to jump ahead. I kind of want to start at the beginning. And again, I think at the beginning, it's to know thyself. I was looking for a mirror in the clip art, but I couldn't find, so I found a spyglass. It kind of has the same purpose. Just sort of turn that spyglass on yourself. You know, what's your own history? How did you come to believe what you do? Who taught you that? And what was their context or their experience? I mean, it takes some, sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but, coming to terms with your own beliefs, coming to terms with your organizational, I call it infraculture. What are the organizational beliefs that keep it either entrenched in one way or ready for movement into another? Coming to terms with the ways that you might be complicitous to maintaining the power dynamic. And this, again, aspects involves the personal and the organizational. Anu alluded to this earlier. We to really form an alliance, we have to really know our own come from, if you will. And that's where I would recommend we start from. After you know thyself, I would then go to familiarize yourself, in this case, with the history of African-American farmers. One way to do that is, first of all, there's not a lot of information out there. Cheryl Danley wrote a question about who's doing some research. Charlene Gilbert did a film and a book several years ago that I actually used in my class. And there's several others, but there's not a lot of work and research and data that's out there that speaks to the African-American farming experience. One of the reasons why I do what I do is to fill this huge void in the literature and the data. But you want to know, how have African-American farmers fared in the food system? What have they been up against? What barriers? And this practice about learning new information about not just African-American farmers, but other farmers that are outside the mainstream agricultural structure, this practice of learning new information in and of itself could be anti-racist practice. Recognizing the past and the current traumas of African-American farmers is one way to know what African-American farmers are up against. Attending meetings, events where Black farmers meet. If there are conferences, send a representative. Outreach can be in many different ways. There's, going to a workshop or going to a conference, basically a Black farmers conference. That's outreach. Sometimes we're dealing with budgets, but the justification could be we're going as a representative so that we can begin to build relationships with African-American farmers and folks that are serving African-American farmers. So then it's, once you familiarize yourself through events, community celebrations at museums, books, listening to people, listening to African-American elders and other folks that have some farming knowledge. Do your own research. And as of May 2013, there will be a film, Rhythm of the Land, which is the documentary that I've been filming. that will also shine some new light on what it's like being an African American farmer. So then you're knowing yourself, you're getting outside, learning the history of African American farmers, knowing what the issues are, learning what the issues and concerns are that affect African American farmers. Then there is organizing toward real anti-racist work. And I'll go now to a lot of what I love about Slocum and Guthman. They've both been working in the area of white privilege, and as white people, they've been confronting the topic of racism. As I said, it's often uncomfortable for white people to do. But she points out that there is a potential difficulty in discussing anti-racist work and being a part of that discussion. The first step is recognizing white privilege, which she says herself is a form of racism. And she contends that whites may notice racism, but hold on to the right to things that privilege enables and not recognizing. So anti-racist work is really exposing all of those realities that exist individually and within groups. It's exposing the power. And the goal of all of this work, this anti-racist work, is to make room at the table for all, as well as to build relationships with groups that we haven't worked with before. It's long-term work. And I challenge your organizations to do the long-term work. That's what you can do today. Find out if there are organizations in your community, in your state, or in your region that work with and meet with African American farmers. Go to their meetings. If there are none, host one of your own. But start from a place that you recognize and give honor to the real history that African American farmers have been dealing with. And maybe even from a point of saying, I know we haven't done the best job, but we're interested in doing a better job. Be sure to set some realistic expectations, because these problems and challenges did not happen overnight. Set a goal, for example, of incorporating or partnering or working with one new organization per quarter or 1 year. Seek out leaders in the movement who have access to African American leaders and begin to build alliances with these groups and individuals. It's not a quick fix. As I said, it didn't happen overnight, but there's work that can be done. The other thing that's so important is to link the farmers with agencies that are set out to address their concerns. Many of these farmers don't know that there may be USD offices that can help them get a hoop house, for example. So connect farmers with the resources that are already out there. A lot of these groups get a lot of money from the USDA to serve these farmers. And so I encourage you to connect these farmers with these groups that are already serving farmers of color. Increasing your cultural competency to better serve African American farmers also means building in leadership opportunities for African American farmers to work in conjunction with your organization or partnering organizations. There's nothing wrong with calling this opportunity what it is, an effort to build long-term work and to do the real dismantling of racism. We're working towards building leadership among African American farmers and African American food advocates. It may be a struggle, but it has to start somewhere. We have to talk about real empowerment. And that, to me, could be a goal. The goal of empowering the community to be self-sufficient and sustaining, given the resources that they can develop on their own and the resources that you can develop as an ally of communities. So the goals are long-term relationship building, creating an environment where there's room for Black farmers at your table. And the next time there was a question and a concern in one of the participants that were calling and putting out invitations to farmers and they weren't coming. And perhaps given some of these ideas of developing your long-term relationships, the next time you put out a call, you can call the individuals or the organizations that you have relationships with. They're not strangers, but they're your partners, they're your collaborators. And hopefully this time, when you put out the call, they will come. Let me summarize. So we've talked about knowing thyself, familiarizing yourself with the history of African American farmers, organizing toward real anti-racist work. And again, I challenge you and your organization to do some personal soul searching, some organizational soul searching, set some realistic expectations. Competency is not achieved overnight. Keep your eye on the goal. The goal is building long-term relationships, transforming current cultures to better serve diverse communities, and to make room at the table for all. And some other resources there. I've written an article long ago. I tried to find it. It was written in 2001. Where have all the Black farmers gone? Mindfully.org has republished it, although they left out a couple of sentences that are key. But it's some reference to the history of African American farmers. The rural development of the USDA has done a really nice job on putting together a PDF, Black Farmers in America, 1865 to 2000. And I'll also leave our Farms to Grow website and my phone number if you'd like some other information about African American farmers. There are some resources that aren't online. I have some resources within my own little collection that I can send to folks if they'd like more information on African American farmers.
Thank you, Gail.
But I'll stop
This is
there.
Anu.
Thank
Gail,
you.
one question for you. That the first article, Where Have All the Black Farmers Gone? Do you have a copy of that in its full text?
I do, and I actually, the CCOF, they have it as well, but I have a copy of it.
Available, and can it be purchased?
We are anticipating May 2013, and there'll be some screenings locally in all of the communities in which I've interviewed farmers. So I'll be going back to the South to do screenings as well. And yes, at some point it will be, and the proceeds will benefit our programs here at Farms to Grow. So I can keep you connected and informed with that, Anu, and if
Great.
you can
Do that.
keep your
Thank you,
listserv
Gail.
informed.
Let's go ahead and move then to our next
Right.
presenters, Joanna and Millie. Are you?
Whoa, wait a minute. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can all hear me. If not, chat away. This is Joanna. I'm going to speak first, and then Millie will add some comments. So just to remind you, we're here in upstate New York at the Groundswell Center for Local Food and Farming. And one thing I forgot to put in the slide, so I'll say it verbally with a big plug. We have received, most of our new farmer training programs are supported by the USDA's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. We received a grant, a 3-year grant. We're now in the 3rd year. It's a very important program for all of us doing beginning farmer work. So I want to put in a big plug for BFRDP. Okay, so I want to start by saying that I think that Groundswell has a really ambitious vision in terms of diversity, and that's reflected in this great picture that we took down at the first annual Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners Conference in Brooklyn 2 years ago. But our vision really is to create an integrated multicultural support network for beginning farmers in this region, and one that really welcomes and brings together people from all sorts of backgrounds and provides training and peer learning and support and mentoring and access to resources for anybody who wants to become a farmer. So it seems like a very simple and sensible vision, but in reality, it's quite a challenge. So we're going to talk about those challenges. I'm going to go in a little bit of a strange order, talk about some of the challenges and talk about what we've learned, and then tell you how we went about learning those things. So really the questions that I'm going to be focusing on, I'm really speaking primarily to the, I think, 80% of white participants in today's webinar. Because I think we are the majority of beginning farmer training program people, and many of us bumping up against these same questions. So why does my program attract so few people of color? And in the larger sphere, why is the whole sustainable ag and the local foods movement so white? We've been scratching our heads about that, haven't we? So I think this is a telling quote. If an organization has disproportionately few people of color as members, it's often because people of color don't see how it benefits them. And that is often because the organization has racist tendencies that it has yet to address. So this is a really difficult thing for many of us to hear, I would say. Was a very difficult thing for me to hear. I see two parts of this statement. The first part is that, okay, people of color may not be aware of how our program could benefit them, right? And that's where I think most of us start off. So we're interested, well, how can we get the information out? How can we educate people about the issues? How can we bring good food to the people, which is the title of, the Gutman article, Bringing Good Food to the People. And it's kind of a missionary stance, shall we say. We have all this good stuff, all this good information, all this good food, all these great beginning farmer opportunities, so we just need to get out there and educate people. But the thing that it's so very hard to confront is the fact that by the very fact that our organizations are primarily white, embedded in that reality, there are racist tendencies that we as white people don't usually recognize. The process of beginning to recognize them is very painful. So a lot of the response to the initial attempt to confront this thing is, well, do we really need to talk about race and racism? We are not an anti-racist organization. We're a beginning farmer program. So I love this quote from Rachel Slocum. It may be useful for community food advocates to actively consider that the U.S. food system was built on a foundation of genocide, slavery, and layers of racist institutions that have dispossessed racialized groups of cultural pride, land, and wealth. So immediately, this is very tough stuff. And it's hard to even look at it. And a lot of time has passed since then, right? We're now in 2000, we have a black president. Do we still need to talk about racism? And the sad truth is, of course, that overt racial discrimination in policy, law, and practice in the past produced enormous advantages in wealth, life chances, and opportunities for whites. The momentum of that past continues to shape social inequalities in the present. So again, as white people, wrapping our minds around the fact that what we see today, the whole demographics of our regions, the tremendous health inequities, racialized health inequities, access to resources, the fact that there are so few black farmers out there, it's the momentum and the continuing momentum of these policies, institutional practices, habits, and all those things that constitute racism that continue to produce racist outcomes. Oops. So I'm going to just say a few things of what we have learned, with a caveat that the we here is a little bit complex and somewhat problematic for our organization. So we, Groundswell Center, are, as an organization, struggling somewhat with all of these issues. As I think I might have mentioned, well, Groundswell, when we began in 2009, we were really an entirely white organization. All of the founding members, well, that's not entirely true, but very predominantly white. So we've worked very hard to bring in and engage and create relationships with people of color, but still, we're all at different stages in our process of thinking about these issues. And there's no one right way to think about them. However, I'm really here expressing my personal learnings, and they are shared somewhat with various people in the Groundswell community, or not shared. So that's something that we're working on. But I'm going to repeat a lot of what Gail said. Basically, cultural competency is not about learning the right words to use. So I think when I came into this work, for example, I really wanted to learn, okay, so what are the words that's okay? What are the terms? What do I avoid saying? And I can do this. I can learn this, I just need to study up. Well, no, I don't think so. So we white people have a tremendous amount of resistance to talking about racism and this thing called white privilege, which we may not have even been thinking about. But so the kinds of reactions that we've had in our own community, why are we spending so much time on this? Is Groundswell about farmer training or anti-racism? What are we doing here? And another common defense mechanism is to try to deflect the conversation to other kinds of oppression. That lots of white people are also oppressed. And that's not to deny the reality of these other dimensions of oppression, but it's very, very tempting for white people to constantly deflect the conversation away from race. I want to just mention this thing of metrocentrism because I don't think it's really on the table that explicitly, but it is also a very important form of oppression that I think affects our work with beginning farmers. That that a lot of what we're talking about with racism can also be applied to the power dynamics around rural versus metropolitan culture. So a lot of rural white people experience a lot of the same kind of discrimination and social ostracism or social power dynamics that people of color get from whites. Okay, so another thing that we're learning is that we've tried to do a lot of our work on this as a group using our own in-house people as facilitators, and I think that sometimes what I believe I am learning is that we will need to bring in more skilled trainers and discussion facilitators to help us get past some of this resistance in our own group. There's very difficult conversations to have. Okay, another very important thing is that one of the foundations of this work is what some people have called courageous conversations, and it's a skill at just being able to talk amongst your group, your leadership team, whatever it is, about racial issues in an interracial group. And these principles are very simple but challenging. So the thing about staying engaged is that especially for white people, it's really easy for us to say, this is too hard, this is too uncomfortable, I'm out of here. I'm going to go back and work on my other stuff that I know, and it's not so scary and painful. But you really have to stay engaged. You have to stick with it, and you have to be willing to experience a lot of discomfort, really. And it's a very challenging place to not feel like you're really on top of what's going on. You don't really understand what's going on. You don't necessarily understand why you've just offended somebody or whatever it may be, but you've got to get past that, and you've just got to live with being uncomfortable, and that's the only way through it. You've also got to really be able to speak what your perspectives are and share that and not hide, not sort of stay out of the conversation because you're not sure you're going to say the right thing. There is no such thing as getting it all right. The process of anti-racist work is to be able to sort of work through things with people who can mentor you, who can tell you what they're experiencing, and you also have to share what you are thinking and experiencing. And the last thing is that this is not going to happen in a week or a year or even 10 years. It's an ongoing conversation, and you're not going to actually solve it or fix it. So it sounds a little bit scary, but it's actually an incredible opportunity to open up your life and your experiences. So another couple of things that we're learning, there's a lot of different approaches that have been taken to this kind of work, and I think I want to distinguish between what we're trying to do and perhaps earlier forms of diversity training that might be focused on individual attitudes and actions. So we just need to become more aware, we need to say the right things, we need to learn some more and educate ourselves. We need to appreciate other cultures. We need to have more diverse people at the table. We need to recruit, engage, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of this work does not examine the organizational culture that you're trying to change, which is usually predominantly a white defined culture. And it does ignore those imbalances of power that Gail mentioned that are absolutely critical to this work. Instead, a social justice approach, or a racial justice approach, if you will, requires us to examine something to know ourselves, as Gail said. We really need to look hard at our organizational structures and the processes we use, our sort of cultural norms within our group, our expectations that produce unjust and racist outcomes. Ouch! Ouch! Well, an unjust and racist outcome, for example, is, well, you're not getting people into your programs who ought to be there. You're not having people in leadership or staff positions who ought to have a chance at those positions. Okay, and we need to look really carefully at who has power and how it gets used, and that's organizationally and personally. I've had some really tough and painful lessons as a confident white woman about how I can sort of throw my power around, and how it affects people in ways that I might not have understood. And how to share not only power but resources. So that's really the frontier, I think, is the real challenges for us who have white privilege and access to a lot of resources, or we actually own and control resources, is that sustainability is going to really require us to look hard at that and to be very creative about how to figure out ways to get those resources out to other people who have been denied or have had resources stolen historically from them. Let's see. Okay, so I'll just describe a few of the things that we have done and tried in order to do this work as an organization, to try to become more culturally competent as an organization. I'd say the first very important thing is that we hooked up early on with some very key mentors, African American women in our community, Katrina Baxter and Jamila Sakira. I don't know if either of you are on the call, Jamila, Katrina. Anyway, hi to you if you're on. Katrina has since moved to Philadelphia. But these two women were very, very committed and interested in food justice and agriculture here in the Ithaca community. So it was actually through a white mentor of mine, Elon Shapiro. I'll also give a shout out to Elon for really keeping the pressure on me to make these connections. And Katrina and Jamila have been highly engaged with our leadership group for the last 3 years and really provided a lot of coaching, a lot of questioning, a lot of challenging to us, and have stayed engaged and helped us with those courageous conversations. And the work is by no means finished. I mean, but without their mentorship, I don't think we would have made nearly the small progress that we have made. Also, secondly, we knew we had to invest substantial time and resources in the kind of relationship building that Gail mentioned. So we had to begin to, okay, our mission may be beginning farmer training, and that's really where we want to focus, but we really had to step outside of our agenda a little bit to really connect with people of color in our own community. So for example, although we don't do urban gardening per se, one of our collaborating organizations is a group called Gardens for Humanity here in downtown Ithaca that does involve a fair number of people of color in our community. And so it's been important to us to be at that table and be supporting the agenda of that group. Similarly, I've listed a bunch of other groups that we collaborate with actively. Also, it was really great for us that the organizers of that we've been able to participate in 2 Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners conferences in New York City in the last couple of years, and I certainly hope those conferences continue. But those conferences allowed us to actually be in a van with 16 people, or it was actually several cars. Katrina and Jamila helped us reach out to a great big group. I think there were 3 white people and 13 African American people traveling together down to this conference. And through the very act of just being together, we began to develop some relationships that have since been really important in our work. Another kind of thing we did was we helped bring Malik Yakini, who's one of the founders of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, an awesome and inspiring speaker, and he did a fabulous couple of events here in Ithaca that really brought together a great diversity of people. Some other things that we have done, let's see. Okay, I myself and two of our staff people have participated in a thing that happens here in Ithaca regularly called talking circles on race and racism. And as Gail mentioned, if there's anything like this in your community, I really encourage you to try to participate. But this, in our case, it's a 5-week session, 2 or 3 hours a week, and it involves about an equal number of people of color and white people to sit together in a room, highly facilitated, very skilled facilitators. There's readings and a lot of very courageous conversation that helps, primarily helps white people understand white privilege and their complicity perhaps in institutional and systemic racism that we may not have been aware of. We've also used our e-newsletter really actively. Katrina Baxter, that I mentioned before, has been writing a monthly article for us about farmers and others of color that she's encountered in her work here and in Philadelphia. In our programming, we make a huge effort, I have to say, to screen and select applicants to maximize diversity in our programs. I have to credit Rachel Firak, our new farmer training program coordinator, with a lot of dedication and attention to that. And she's done a great job. In our first year, I think we attracted, I believe it was 30% of our program participants were people of color, which was way above the demographic average here in our community. We haven't been able to maintain that, but we're still working on that. We have engaged our advisors, our steering committee, our students in discussions and exercises about race and racism. As I mentioned, we have not brought in professional facilitators for that process, and we're considering different ways that we might move that work forward. And also in our summer class, the class that Millie took that she mentioned, the summer practicum, we've tried to work with our own students, but again, we feel that we have a lot to learn about how you actually can teach or work with white people on these issues. Gail and Millie and I, we came up with a group of, a list of things so as not to be too discouraging. There is a lot that can be done and that needs to be done. Some of things that you can do as individuals and some things as organizations. So a lot of this repeats what Gail had said. But certainly as an individual, you can really work on building personal relationships outside of your current comfort zone. Finding a mentor is very important, or more than one. And there are a lot of white people out there who are working on these issues, and there are a lot of people of color who the burden is on us as white people to educate ourselves and to do the work. But still, if you're able to hook up with somebody who's willing to help you through the process, it's going to be extremely helpful. And again, educate yourself about the history and the ongoing reality of discrimination that is being experienced by the people you want to work with. What is the reality that they're dealing with, and why should, in the context of everything that they are currently dealing with, why should they be interested in the work in the program that you have to work with to offer to them? Is that, how high up on the priority list might that be actually? And again, to participate in any kind of anti-racism training that you can have access to. The last thing, have patience, but not too much. This is a lifelong journey, and so it's not gonna be resolved. You're gonna be in that zone of discomfort for a long time, so you do need to have patience. But I would also admonish us not to have too much patience, because this work is absolutely critical. And although white people have the opportunity to turn our backs on this work, people of color do not. And people of color die every day because because of white people turning our backs on these issues. So too much patience, not good. Okay, as an organization, provide anti-racism training for your staff and volunteers. Learn how to stay in those courageous conversations. Build collaborative relationships with other organizations led by people of color, and support their agendas, which might not be exactly yours, but that's critical. Recruit people of color for leadership positions in your organizations when you're ready for that. And give visibility to the people of color, the stories, images, examples that you can find. Millie's going to talk about that a little bit later as well. And finally, I think this might be the most difficult, but the most important is that we have to learn to, as organizations, to commit to anti-racism as absolutely central to sustainability. We may be coming from the sustainable ag movement or the sustainable this, that, or the other, but until we really commit to and incorporate and dedicate ourselves also to anti-racist work, we're not really addressing the social dimensions of sustainability. I think that's the end of my thing. Am I right? Yes, extra slides if needed. Okay, so I'm all set, Anu.
Oh, okay, thanks, Joanna. Is Millie going to add any comments at this point?
Yes, I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything, but Millie's ready to go.
Well, I wanted to add on number 4, give visibility to people of color, example, images, and stories. I so believe this, and I never knew that, I didn't know this about myself, that when I saw the video by Malik Yakini, Urban Roots, and he's from Detroit, and he's led a big movement on urban gardening in Detroit. And I would suggest you see that because it is amazing and very moving, and it's just wonderful. And you can buy his video online, Urban Roots. And another video, which is Majora Carter. She's African American from the Bronx, and I'm from the Bronx, so I'm going to push her. So she is a powerful speaker. She's involved in environmental justice and economic development. And I saw her video, and it was so amazing because, it talks about what I believe in, which is sustainability. And, these people, when I saw her and I saw her speak, I never realized how much it affects me, in a positive way. And that when you see people like you or that grew up like you or grew up where you grew up, that it makes such a difference. And I would suggest that you, wherever you're located, find these powerful people that are positive people and that are involved in agriculture or beginning farming, that these people will be, will affect, people of color in getting involved or or at least thinking about it, because I never thought, I mean, I'm from the Bronx, I've been in an orphan's environment all my life, and here I am talking about this and believing in it and perhaps getting involved in it and, getting a small farm. So I just, think you should check that out. And that's it.
This to you, Anu.
Okay, thank you, Millie, and thanks to Gail and Joanna as well for those wonderful comments. And so now we'd like to transition to opening this to a discussion. And just to start us off, we got some questions from participants that were submitted prior to the webinar. And so I'd like to be able to we'll start with one of these, and as all of you submit questions in the chat box, we'll try to get through what we can. And so, I also wanted you to note that you'll see that under the box that says recommended resources, you can click and download various publications that were mentioned, references that were mentioned by the speakers. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. So let's start with the first question. that came in from Susan Jasser at Lincoln University Cooperative Extension in Missouri. And I'll just read what she says here. I'm an extension worker and find it difficult to market workshops to people of color. There seems to be a trust issue with research-based information too. I'm in the Midwest, and getting the word out about programs and workshops through regular extension channels does not really work. I've known this for some time and have been working on alternative methods to advertise. Short to going to every church in my county, what suggestions do you have? Why don't we start with Gail?
Okay. Well, that was going to be one suggestion, is to go where the audience might be, typically. Churches, community meetings, there may be markets where people set up, farmers markets, flea markets, meetings or conferences. But I mean, it is going to require actually extending, with the extension model, going out to the community. And I can understand the trust issue. I know from African American farmers, they haven't gotten the best help from the USDA ag extension workers. It's so, the challenge is to rectify a problem that's been created, many, many decades before Susan came on board. And it's going to take time. It's just relationship building.
Joanna, do you have any other?
I don't have much to add except that I think, it harks back to everything that Gail and I have said about there's not a quick fix. I don't think it's possible to come from a position of just not knowing anything about the community that you're trying to connect with, and having no relationships, and going out there and bringing good food to the people or bringing your good program to the people. So I think short of going to every church in my counties, well, that might be what it takes, but it also, maybe if there's also a listening period, I think, that we have to go through before promoting our solution. I think we need to learn what the issues are in that community and maybe look for some connections that we can offer support in.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. Again, if any of you that are participating in this webinar have questions, do put them into the chat box. And if you find that you're going to have to leave us, we'd really appreciate it if you took our feedback survey, where you can click in the top box and just give us some feedback on this webinar if you have to leave before the end at 1:30.
Can I add another comment, Anu? I see that Eduardo has raised a really, really important about the trust issue associated with research. This is another thing about understanding the history, that as a white person from an academic background, we may have a whole stance towards research and a trust in the research establishment that we take for granted, that is just not there for many other communities who have historically been very much hurt by these institutions. So beginning to understand, I think the whole issue of trust is very, very difficult and challenging, and it's I think we just have to not be personally hurt. We have to learn how to not be personally hurt when there are trust issues, and to understand that reflects a huge historical set of baggage that in a sense we represent these institutions, and so there are trust issues with us as individuals. We can't take it personally. We have to continue to work.
And let me also add that when you are in the community, if you're attending the churches and you're part of the discussion and you're listening to African American farmers in particular, it will influence your research. And then your research will be about what it is African American farmers want to know about. I mean, it's got to be relevant. And moreover, they don't want to just, from what I hear often, just have another research project. We want some real tangible infrastructure development, some capacity being built. We know what the issues are. We just need the programming and the infrastructure to move from point A to point B to the next point. And so the research agenda really could be, what are the issues and the challenges that are facing African American farmers, and present the research from that perspective.
Great, thank you, Gail. I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next question that we received in advance. And again, I'd encourage any of you, if you have thoughts or questions for our speakers, please do put those in the chat box. We received a question from Ali Zaparo at the University of Vermont. I would like to know how to make sure we're reaching a diverse audience in a state that's largely considered monocultural. On that same note, I'd like to know how to make sure language is inclusive and inviting to all races and cultures, even though those particular colors and races might not be in the room. I see a lot of assumptions and institutional racism, and I would really like to address it. Are there some suggestions from Gail or Joanna or Millie on how to address this issue of language?
Well, I mean,
For me, this is Millie speaking. I mean, I think I keep going back to information sharing, just the fact that I've been working with Groundswell. I've met or have spoken to some of the students. One particular couple, it's an African American couple. They are working in Brooklyn right now, Mario Calloway and Kiera Calloway. And just because I interviewed them, I learned about what they're doing in Brooklyn. And somebody has sent me an email about a fellowship in New York City for $100,000. And it just falls in line with their out-of-the-box thinking. And I just forwarded that information to them, and she was really excited to hear about it and is going to apply for that. And I'm thrilled, and I think it's just, just sharing information. Just that simple thing that I did of forwarding an email can make a difference, and again, all I can say is just sharing information, emails, videos. Those videos that I saw were very moving and, helped me think about the possibilities, of what I can do. If they're doing it, I feel like, wow, I could do this, or it's not too crazy what I'm thinking, when there's people that look like you or, are from your community. It makes a big difference. And Majora Carter's video, Greening the Ghetto, is the one I'm referring to, is really very cool and inspiring. And that's all I can add.
I would also add that is to identify any groups that are specifically the demographic of the language speaking group that you're wanting to serve, and perhaps empower them. Work to see how your work can empower their work. Unless you have translators and, a Spanish speaking or Hmong speaking staff person, it's still the missionary model. We're taking this good food to you and you should love it, right? When in fact, one model could be, how can I empower your Spanish speaking organization to better serve a Spanish speaking community that's naturally probably going to come to you for services anyway? How do we collaborate? And we're getting the same outcome. We're empowering different language speakers, and we're part of the inclusiveness factor that's inviting everybody. And again, I think that work is also anti-racist practice.
Okay, we had a question earlier on from Vicki Marone that I thought I would bring up at this point because it ties in a bit with an early question we also got from Joanna Lalikas. The question was Does anyone have any experience with engaging youth or young adults from migrant families with inner city youth to foster peer-to-peer training and to validate migrant youth experience? So I wondered if there was anyone who knew of programs. If you're one of our participants, please just enter it into the chat box. But how about from our speakers?
This is Joanna, and I'm echoing. We have done virtually nothing on this to date, although I do think in upstate New York it's a really important issue. And we also intend to be working much more heavily with new immigrants in the next year or so, and trying to build our relationships with new immigrant communities in the central New York area. But we don't have a lot of experience to date with migrant farm workers.
I don't know if this group works with youth, but in Salinas, California, there's a group called ALBA, A-L-B-A, agriculture, land-based. I can't remember what the last acronym is, but they do train and work with migrant communities and training them to become farm owners, actually. And so they may have a focus on youth, but you could probably find them on alba.org.
Great, thank you. And if there's anyone else, oh, Sarah just added a comment that there is a program in Portland, Maine that does this type of programming with refugee and migrant youth and adults.
Cultivating community.
And so that might be cultivating communities, but we aren't completely sure, so we'll find out some more about it. Okay, Sarah says yes, that is. We had another comment from Mary Ulrich that as an extension educator, she needs resources other than English other than English primary farmers. And so if we have Spanish speaking and a number of Asian language dominant clients who need access to written materials, we just don't have them. And also from Joanna Lelecas, the question is, I also have an interest in experience of the speakers in bringing Latinos, including those who are working as farm workers, into and dealing with language challenges and beginning farmer programs. So the issue of language for inclusiveness is one that we'd like to hear some more about, and how your organizations have done work to deal with the language issue.
You know, I would recommend going to the USDA. I mean, it could be your state school to find out if there are materials that the USDA has created in one region that you could use in another. What I would hope that the different USDA resource materials are translated into the major languages, and I feel like that is the case here in California, because we have a major Asian and Latino speaking farmers in our state. So I would just check to see if the USDA, some office within that agency, is not already translated some of these documents.
This is Joanna. We have some very limited experience with this issue of non-English as primary language trainees, and so we very quickly learned. We started off. We have a 100-hour certificate program, sustainable farming certificate program, and we had our first English ESL trainees this year that we tried, I would say unsuccessfully, to incorporate into the main program. So these were Karen Burmese refugees, and two of the men were interested in the farming skills, and the third was a brother-in-law who was providing translation. But so our concept was that they could be in the workshops together, and there would be real-time translation going on. That we paid for the translation, but in actual fact, there wasn't a really good fit between the focus of the information we were providing and their immediate needs, and it turned out to be very cumbersome to try to do that real-time translation. And so I believe how we handled it was to just sort of tinker with the registration. In a way, we had them come to the farm tours or any of the workshops where they could actually see a lot of the visual. Classroom stuff didn't work so well, but where they could be on a farm actually seeing stuff and you know, having their conversations off to the side more easily, that worked fairly well. But until we can, we're going to provide a more focused effort to actually tailor programs to people with specific language needs, so we can do the proper translations that are needed to get the good information across. That's sort of our limited experience. But I would say about finding support for that kind of thing. In this case, there's one of our local churches that does a lot of work with the people from this particular refugee community. So that church is very willing to help with the costs of translation and some of the even startup support for their farming enterprises, modest startup support. They're eager to, you know, to buy the products of these beginning farmers. So sometimes through a church group or some other local group, you can find the resources to develop some tailored support to these beginning farmers.
Great. Thank you for those suggestions. We have another question here that I think we've spoken about a little bit, but there's some interest in some more conversation about. That is, how about when your working group has the belief that they're not racist, so they don't need to discuss it? What are some suggestions and other experiences that you have had to help engage probably a primarily white working group talk about issues of race when there may not be racial diversity represented?
Well, I would start from the anti-racist practice and hand copies of Rachel Slocum's article. I mean, that's in and of itself the denial. That practice is white privilege equals a racist practice in and of itself. So yes, you just have to present the information. And what I like about Slocum and Guthman is that they're both white people talking about white privilege. I think it's easier and more palatable for white people to hear that coming from a white person than coming from me, an African American woman. So there's from Guthman and Slocum, I would just refer to some of their work, and their work is based on research and experience. A great question.
Joanna, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
Tell you the truth, Anu, I couldn't hear you very well, so I didn't have a good grip on the question. Sorry.
I'll read it again.
Oh.
How about when you're working? I'm getting it. How about when your working group has the belief that they are not racist, so they don't need to discuss it? So what have you specifically to engage your group in these conversations?
Okay, yes. Okay, well that relates to, remember in my presentation I said we still have work to do. I think that's precisely the issue, that it's really easy for people. We have a lot of extremely well-intentioned, well-educated people in our leadership group who are very aware on an intellectual level, maybe have even done research, and so they're very aware of the racial disparities in our culture. But it's a very different thing to be intellectually aware of these things. And I think the common response for those of us who are kind of aware but not really engaged in the issues is, well, what on earth can I do? Just tell me what you want me to do. What can I do about it? You know, it's sort of like throwing up our hands. This is such a big thing. We know all about it, but there really is, you know, what do you want us to do? And I think that is the question, isn't it? What are we going to do? Instead of asking the question rhetorically, you know, it is a real question. What are white people going to do about racism? And we have to figure that out. I don't know what the answer is, but we have to start working on it. So in the group, I think, as I mentioned, these conversations are really hard. What I believe we have found is that sometimes entering into these conversations with not quite enough skill as facilitators, as trainers, can actually engender a lot of resistance and get get us stuck in a place where we don't really have the skills as a group to move ourselves beyond that. I hope I'm making sense. So what I think for our group, our next step is actually to engage with some more experienced trainers and facilitators who've worked with a lot of white people on these issues and have techniques for uncovering some of the assumptions and really working through some of the issues more effectively than we were able to do with our little in-house our in-house talents. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. We are coming close to the end of our webinar. We just have a few minutes left, and I want to please encourage all of you to do our feedback survey, because it'll be helpful not only to us in thinking about future activities and other webinars, but also it helps us understand and learn what your other interests might be. And I think I want to take the time for one more question that was here, and it came from Sarah Pappas in Detroit. And I think it's an important one that does build a bit upon some of the comments of both Gail and Joanna. But I'll go ahead and read it here. While there's a lot of issues and questions that I have, one that has always stood out is how to talk openly about the legacy of slavery in agricultural work and the emotional response some people with familiar or cultural histories of slavery feel when they begin to do field work. It's obviously a painful and personal thing to go through, and I've never come across any resources for leaders or facilitators to help that conversation happen. It's definitely not restricted to adults, and I've seen it come up with youth introduced to farming also. But I think that the pain is felt. Thank you, Sarah, for that question and that comment, and we'll start again with Gail, perhaps.
Okay. Not to tout the values of this film that's going to be out next year, but one of the things that will happen with a film, for example, that it will create discussion. Charlene Gilbert did a film several years ago called Homecoming, and it's a film she's tracing her family's roots and African-American farming. And it's a good caveat in a way to talk about the experience and the legacy of slavery and what that is, how it's felt today and how it's lived today in the farming and the landscape of farming. So I would just say, use a book or a film or something to open discussion, maybe a story, and begin to it's got to be open, upfront dialogue from the feelings. Eduardo said something in his note about the heart. Folks really have to just come from the heart. It's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. But once all of that is laid on the table, you can't go back to the way it was before. And then there's movement. There's continued transformation. But it has to be talked about. We've got to talk about it now or later. And I'd rather talk about it sooner than later.
Thanks, Gail. Joanna or Millie, any comments? Might be muted.
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. Joanna?
I guess the only thing I would say is I sense embedded in the question how to talk openly about the legacy of slavery, how to talk openly about any of the dimensions of these issues about race and racism is really hard, and I encourage everybody on the call to be willing to be the person who puts it on the table, because somebody has to start the conversation. And if you're waiting, I don't know that Sarah was thinking this way at all, but if it is not going to be comfortable necessarily, so if you can just get over that and go ahead and be the one to create an opening for the conversation to begin. It's that's the hardest part, I think, is to, we have such resistance to even talking about these issues that if you can just be the person who takes the step of signaling that it's okay to talk about it, that could open up a lot of opportunities for other people to play a role in the conversation.
Right. And the thing about youth is especially African American youth, they don't have a real context. One of the things that they'll see in this film with stories of sharecroppers, and farmers is, from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, how it was that African American communities actually were able to survive. So for youth, for them, it's almost it's a make-believe story. It's something that didn't really happen. So creating for them opportunities for learning as well, that's also going to need to take place within that discussion, in my opinion.
Great. Well, we're at 1:30, and so that ends the time for our webinar. I would like very much to thank Gail, Joanna, and Millie for joining us in this conversation and helping us actually take the first steps in
You're welcome.
our cultural sensitivity, our competency, and our own thinking and talking amongst ourselves about this very important topic. And if you could please fill in the feedback survey, that'd be really helpful to us. And with that, I think we are at the end of our webinar, and we have a bunch of great references that have been added in the chat box. We will try to collect those and make those available as well.
We'll be posting and recording in a day.
The whole webinar will be posted at our website, northeastbeginningfarmers.org/trainers. In that toolbox for you to view or to share with others within a day, and we'll also have all of the recommended resources and other reference materials linked there as well. We'll also be sending you, we would like to know more from you about what you'd like in the future on this topic, and if we would want to have amongst ourselves a continuing conversation to explore some of these issues and in our own work more thoroughly. So please do fill out the feedback survey for us. And thank you for taking time to join us in this really important conversation. Have a good afternoon, everybody.